Somewhere on Fort Bragg there is a dining facility, and at 4 in the morning a master sergeant is already standing inside it, checking the temperature on a long steel pan of scrambled eggs before the first formation shows up to eat. His job is the one the Army codes as 9-2 Golf, culinary specialist, and after more than a decade in, he is very good at it. 2 miles away, on the far side of a fence line nobody is allowed to photograph, a different master sergeant is wiping down a rifle he carried into a dark room the week before, in a unit Charlie Beckwith stood up in November of 1977 to be America's answer to the British SAS. Same army, same rank, same years on the clock. And when both of those men open their leave and earnings statement this month, the top line, the basic pay line, reads the exact same number, down to the dollar. The man who kicks indoors for a living and the man who runs the omelet line are, on the single line that matters most on that page, paid identically. And here is the part that gets people heated in the comments section before the first minute is even over. The Army did not do that by accident. It wrote that equality into law on purpose, and it defends it every single year. So if the base pay is genuinely the same, and it is, then the real question is not whether the operator takes home more. He does. The question is where the Army hides the difference, because it flatly refuses to put that difference on the one line everybody actually looks at. If you have ever stared at a military pay chart and wondered why the most dangerous job in the building is nowhere on it, stay with us and subscribe, because pulling these statements apart line by line is exactly what we do here. But start with why the baseline is identical in the first place, because it is not a glitch and it is not laziness. Basic pay in the United States military is set by Congress every year inside the National Defense Authorization Act. It runs on a single table, pay grade down one side, years of service across the top, and the number lives where your row meets your column. That is the entire calculation. The only things that can move it are the two axes of the table itself. Pin on another stripe and you drop to a lower row. Cross another longevity gate, past 18 years and then past 20, and you slide one column to the right. That is the whole engine of a military paycheck. Merit does not enter into it. Valor does not enter into it. And the specific daily misery of your particular job counts for nothing either, because Congress writes one table for every soldier in every branch and hands it down once a year. There is no box on that table for kicks indoors and no box for runs the kitchen. A master sergeant is a master sergeant. Drop our cook and our operator onto that grid with the same rank and the same time in, and they land on the identical square, because the table was built to be blind to what either of them actually does. On paper, deliberately, the work is invisible. And that blindness is not sloppiness, it is a load-bearing wall. A force of well over 1 million people does not hold together if the guy next to you is pulling a fatter base check because his job photographs better. So the Army made a promise to itself. A stripe is a stripe, a year is a year, and nobody outranks anybody on money for being cooler. It is the closest thing military pay has to a religion. Push it further and it holds even under fire. Send both of those master sergeants to the same rocket-happy corner of the world, and they draw the same imminent danger pay at the same rate. Because the mortar that comes down on the chow hall does not stop to check anybody's job code first. On the baseline and on the danger line, the cook and the operator are equals, and the institution means it. And do not read any of this as a knock on the cook. A field-feeding master sergeant who keeps 1,000 soldiers eating hot food out of a dusty kitchen tent is doing work the Army genuinely cannot run without, and he earned every stripe on his sleeve the long, slow way, same as anyone. That is exactly the point. The table honors both men alike, because honoring the rank is the only thing the table was ever built to do. And the baseline is not the only place that blindness shows up. Look at the allowances stacked underneath it, and the same pattern holds all the way down the page. Both men draw a housing allowance set by their rank, their zip code, and whether they have a family, never by what they do once they walk out the door. Both draw the same subsistence allowance for food. Send either one away from his family for months on end, and the family separation payment lands on both statements at the identical rate. Everywhere the Army pays a soldier simply for being a soldier of a given rank, the cook and the operator come out dead even. The gap only cracks open in the one category the Army walls off, for the danger and the skill of the actual work. And that category sits well below the fold. But the basic pay line is the top line. It is not the only line. And the moment you stop reading at the top of that statement is the moment you miss the entire story. Keep scrolling down the operator's page, past the base pay, And this is where the two documents stop looking anything alike. The first new entry is jump pay. The operator holds parachute status, so every month there is a hazardous duty line on his statement for it, a couple $100, and that line has its own small scandal attached. It sat frozen for decades. The Army did not raise parachute pay 1 cent from the late 90s all the way to last year. And when it finally did move, in 2025, the way it found the money told you exactly how the institution thinks about its own people. It did not print new money. It stripped the same jump pay off of roughly 20,000 support soldiers sitting in airborne units who had been quietly collecting it for years without going out the door much, and it shoved that money toward the people actually jumping. The Secretary of Defense flew down to Fort Bragg to put his name on the announcement in person, a raise the Army was proud enough of to build a ceremony around, and even after all of that, the new figure still sat below where plain inflation would have dragged the old one. Parachute pay had gone a full generation untouched, and the fix, when it finally came, was to take the money from the many who had stopped jumping and hand it to the few who never did. The cook, of course, never had this line to argue about. He does not jump out of anything. Then it starts to stack, and this is the part the pay chart will never show you. Under the static line jump pay sits a second, higher line for military freefall, the halo-qualified men who exit an aircraft up where the air is thin and the oxygen mask is not a prop. That is its own category of hazard, and its own separate payment, and almost nobody outside the community even knows the two are priced differently. The freefall badge comes from a different school and a different skill entirely, and the man wearing it has proven he can steer himself down onto a target from an exit most soldiers would not survive. Below that, special duty assignment pay, which is the Army's own quiet confession that some jobs are simply harder than the rank on them implies. The regulation reserves that pay for duties it calls extraordinarily difficult, or carrying an unusual degree of responsibility, which is about as near as the pay system ever drifts to naming the unit out loud without actually naming it. It runs up to a monthly cap, and the men in the unit draw from the top of that band, not the bottom. Below that, demolition pay, for the operators certified to handle the explosives that take a door or a wall off its frame. Below that, dive pay, for the combat diver who arrives from the water instead of the sky. And below that, a foreign language line, because the operator who can actually work a room in Arabic or Pashto earns a standing bonus for the tongue. And the cook, fluent in nothing the mission happens to need, does not. Here is what makes that stack easy to underestimate. Every single one of those lines is small. A few $100s here, a couple hundred there, the kind of number you would wave off on its own. But they are not on their own. They sit on top of each other, month after month, and stacked together they are the entire difference between the operator's statement and the cook's. And if you already knew half of those lines before we even listed them, then honestly, you are not really an audience for this channel, you are already one of us. There is a tier built for exactly that, cadet, and it gets you every one of these breakdowns a full day before the public does, a badge on your name in the comments, and the occasional shout on the way out. The door is open if you want it. Now sit with the strangest fact in all of this. Not one of those 6 lines touches the basic pay number. Not the jump pay, not the free fall pay, not the special duty pay, none of it. The Army will pay a man extra 6 separate ways, in 6 separate boxes, before it will move the one number at the top of the page to admit that his job is worth more than the man running the eggs. Think about what that actually is. The Army will admit it in 6 separate boxes down the page, as long as it never has to admit it on the top line. So why build it that way? Why not just hand the operator a bigger base number and end the whole shell game? Because the base table exists to hold a promise the force makes to itself, that a rank is a rank, and no soldier is worth more raw dollars than the soldier beside him. Setting an honest price on the danger of any one job was never what that table was for. And the special pays are the escape hatch that lets the Army keep that promise on the front page, while it settles the real accounting in the fine print. It gets the fiction of equality where everyone can see it, and it gets to price the operator's actual skills down in the boxes almost nobody reads. Every one of those incentive lines is the institution quietly conceding what it will not say in plain sight. That the man who does the hardest thing in the building is worth more, and that it would simply rather not write that number down where a cook or a congressman or a reporter might see it and ask why. And the quietest part of the whole arrangement is that the operator knows. He has seen his own baseline sitting on the page right next to everybody else's. He knows to the dollar what the table says he is worth, And the entire ethos of the quiet professional is to swallow that and say nothing about it. The Army is counting on exactly that. It builds its most capable people to never make noise about money, and then it pays them on a table that only works as long as they refuse to. And it gets worse when you remember what that operator cost to build in the first place. The Army pours a small fortune into finding him, through selection and the months of the operator training course that follow, washing out most of the men who volunteer to get to the few who make it. The attrition through a selection course is brutal, a small fraction of a starting class left standing at the end, and every man who quits or gets dropped along the way is money the Army spent just to learn he was not the one. It sinks all of that into one senior sergeant, and then it pays him on a table that pretends the investment never happened, a table that values the finished operator, on that baseline, at precisely the same rate as the cook it trained for 9 weeks. The most expensive human being in the building, priced on the front page like the cheapest. And the clearest sign that the base table is lying by omission is that the Pentagon itself does not believe it. If a stripe were really just a stripe, the services would not turn around and bolt enormous re-enlistment bonuses onto their special operators for the sole purpose of keeping them from walking. But that is exactly what they do. In the one corner of special operations where the figures are actually public, the naval side, the retention bonuses aimed at senior operators have climbed past $100,000, and the Navy states flatly in its own paperwork that the money exists to compete for combat-experienced operators against an outside labor market that wants them badly. Sit with that for a second. The military cuts a 6-figure check to hold on to a man it officially prices, on the base table, like any other sergeant of his rank. The Army will not touch his base number, so it hands him a separate check big enough to keep him from walking over it instead. Which brings us to the part that should genuinely bother you. Because somebody did eventually put an honest number on that operator, and it was not the Army. When the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan spun all the way up, the private security firms went hunting for exactly these men, the ones the base table valued like line cooks, and they paid what that table never would. The federal government was cutting checks to a company like Blackwater on the order of $1,000 a day for a single man. More in 1 week than a stacked military statement, base pay and every incentive line combined, paid that same man in a month. By the middle of the 2000s, that pull had become a steady bleed of the most experienced men off active duty and onto the contract, because a single tour on a protective detail could out-earn several years in uniform. The man riding in the vehicle did not pocket the whole $1,000. The firm kept its own cut, but even his share ran to several $100s for a day's work, and several hundred a day was still a number the base table could not reach in a month. And the firms doing the buying were not outsiders who misunderstood the product. A company like Triple Canopy was founded in 2003 by former Special Operations veterans, men who had carried that skill at government rate and knew precisely what it was worth the day they took it private. The open market looked at the exact operator the Army's base table priced identically to a cook, and it did not blink. It priced him at a mortgage payment a month. That is the whole tell. On paper, inside the fence, a master sergeant is a master sergeant, and the kill house and the kitchen draw the same baseline. The moment that same operator walked out the gate and into the private market, somebody put a real price on his skill inside of a week. The equality was never really a statement about what the work is worth. It was a rule about what the Army is willing to write down. So here is the one we actually want you to fight about below. Is that equal baseline the last honest thing left in military pay? A stripe is a stripe and everybody eats the same, the way it is supposed to be. Or is it an institution lowballing its most valuable people right up to the edge of insult, and then acting wounded when the contract money finally pulls them out the door? Pick a side and defend it in the comments, because there is a real argument here and both sides have a case. And if you want the version of this we keep off the public page, the specific pay lines and the specific numbers that units genuinely do not love seeing listed out in a video like this one, that is what the official tier is for. It is where we keep the parts that do not survive daylight. Either way, remember the one thing that statement will never let you forget. The paper does not lie about any of it. You just have to be willing to read past the top line.